My sister called me on a Thursday morning in October and told me my husband had been in an accident. She said it the way you say things you have rehearsed, steady, careful, each word placed deliberately. She said there had been a collision on the interstate. She said it was serious. She said I needed to come to the hospital. I was in the middle of making coffee. I remember that specifically. The coffee maker was still running, and the smell of it filled the kitchen, and I stood there with the phone against my ear, and the specific silence of someone whose brain has received information it is not yet processing. I said, "How serious?" She said, "Kate, you need to come." I went. Thomas, my husband, was pronounced dead at 11:14 that morning. I know the exact time because the doctor told me, and I wrote it on a grocery receipt I found in my coat pocket, because it was the only paper I had, and I did not want to forget. As if you could forget something like that. As if the time makes it more real, or less real, or anything other than the number attached to the worst moment of your life. I was 34 years old. We had been married for 6 years. He drove a grey sedan that he had bought the year before we met, and that he said he was going to replace every year for 4 years running, and never did. And the last time I saw it, it was in our driveway with a parking permit on the dashboard from a concert we had gone to 3 weeks before, because Thomas never cleaned out his car, and I had stopped asking him to. The car was gone. Thomas was gone. My sister Lauren drove me home from the hospital. I want to tell you about Lauren before I tell you what I found 3 weeks later. I want to tell you who she was to me before I tell you what she became in the span of one afternoon. Because the worst betrayals are not the ones that come from strangers. They are the ones that come from the people who have been standing closest to you your whole life. Are the ones whose voice you know, whose laugh you know, who know the way you cry and have handed you tissues through every version of it. Lauren is 3 years older than me. She has been my closest friend for as long as I have known what a close friend was. When my parents divorced, we shared a room, and she let me sleep in her bed for 2 weeks without making it a thing. When I got my first job, and my boss made me cry in a stairwell, she called him on a private number and said things I am glad I was not there to hear. She was my maid of honor at my wedding. She danced with Thomas's uncle when no one else would, because the man was 81 and had driven 4 hours and deserved a dance. She was my person. She drove me home from the hospital, and she sat with me on my couch, and she held my hand, and I cried in the way you cry when the thing is too large for any specific direction, and she held my hand through all of it. She was there when Thomas died. That is what she told me. She had been the one to get the call. She had identified him. She had come to me because she wanted me to hear it from her and not from a stranger. That is what she told me. I believed her. I believed her for 3 weeks, and then I was standing outside a hotel 2 hours from my house on a Tuesday afternoon, and I saw my husband walk through the lobby door with my sister. He was carrying her bag. Welcome to Cold Drama Stories. Before we go any further, if you are already hooked and you want to hear every part of this story, drop the word alive in the comments right now. I want to know you are here with me. Tell me where you are watching from, and hit the like button right now, not at the end, so this story reaches more people who need to hear it. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because the beginning is where everything that matters actually lives. The 3 weeks between the hospital and the hotel were the worst of my life. Not dramatically worst. Worst in the specific, unglamorous, relentless way that grief actually is. Paperwork, and casseroles, and the particular exhaustion of having to explain the same thing to 12 different phone operators who needed to verify your account before they could note that the primary holder was deceased. Thomas's shoes were still by the back door. I could not move them. I knew it was irrational, and I moved them anyway, twice, and then put them back both times, because the corner where they were was theirs, and moving them felt like agreeing to something I had not finished disagreeing with. Lauren was there every day, not hovering. She knew me better than to hover. She would come in the morning, make coffee, handle the things that needed handling, and leave when I needed her to leave. She answered calls from people I could not talk to. She organized the food that arrived in a continuous stream, because people, when they do not know what to do with grief, send food, and I was receiving enough lasagna to sustain a small country. She was good, patient, present in exactly the right ways. I did not question it. She was my sister. She was doing what she had always done, which was showing up. I should have noticed the phone calls. She stepped out 3 times in the first week to take calls she did not explain. Once in the hallway, once outside on the porch, once in the bathroom with the door closed, which is where you go when you do not want to be heard, not where you go to take a condolence call. I noticed each time. I filed each time. I did not ask. I was 34 years old, and my husband was dead, and asking my sister why she took a phone call in the bathroom felt like the kind of suspicious, ungracious thing you did not do to someone who was holding you together. So I filed it, and I did not ask, and I kept filing until the filing ran out of room. The funeral was on a Saturday, 60 people. His mother Janet flew in from Portland, small and exhausted, with the specific redness of someone who has been crying on a plane and held it together through luggage claim. She held me in the parking lot for a long time without saying anything, which was right. Some people know what silence is for. Thomas's best friend Marcus gave the eulogy. He told a story about a camping trip that had gone badly wrong, involving a bear and a broken tent zipper, and Thomas's extremely confident and entirely incorrect belief that he could fix anything with a multi-tool. By the time Marcus got to the part where Thomas was stuck halfway out of a tent, trying to negotiate with an animal that he refused to acknowledge was larger than him, half the room was crying and the other half was laughing, and for about 40 seconds it was almost okay. Almost. Lauren sat beside me through all of it. She held my hand during the eulogy. She refilled my water glass. She intercepted Janet when Janet had been standing at the casket too long, and gently, carefully, redirected her toward the chair that had been put out for her. She was the best version of herself that day. I have thought about this many times since. She was the best version of herself that day, at the funeral of the man she knew was not dead. I think about that. The Tuesday that changed everything did not start as anything. It started as a Tuesday, the ordinary, unglamorous kind, 3 weeks into grief, the kind of day when you go to the grocery store because you have run out of bread, and because the act of having a reason to leave the house feels important and small at the same time. I went to the grocery store. I bought bread and coffee, and the specific granola bars Thomas had liked that I bought without thinking, and then stood in the aisle holding them for a moment before putting them in the cart, because I could not make myself put them back. On the way home, I took the long way, not for any reason, just because the long way went past the reservoir, and the water was doing the thing it does in October when the light is low, and sometimes you choose the long way because it is the long way, and you are not ready to go back to the house yet. The long way went past the Meridian Hotel. I had been past it 100 times. A conference hotel, the kind with a circular driveway and a man in a coat by the door, the kind you do not look at unless you have a reason to be looking at it. I had a reason that Tuesday. Lauren's car was in the parking lot. I know her car. I have known her car for 4 years, a blue hatchback with a dent in the rear panel from the parking garage incident she refuses to elaborate on. I know the crack in the left tail light. I know the parking sticker from the gym she stopped going to 2 years ago and keeps meaning to remove. Her car was in the parking lot of the Meridian Hotel at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I turned in. I do not know exactly what I was thinking. Something between she must be meeting someone for work and I need to ask her something before I go home. The vague, practical thoughts you think when you are not ready to think the real thought, which is that something is wrong and you do not yet know what shape the wrong is. I pulled into a spot. I walked toward the entrance. The lobby doors opened. 2 people walked out. The first was Lauren. She was wearing the grey coat she had bought last winter. the one she had asked my opinion on before she bought it, and I had said it was good. Get the grey one. She was laughing at something. The second person was carrying her bag. He was tall. He had the particular way of walking that I had watched across 100 rooms, slightly forward-leaning, like someone who is always almost arriving somewhere. He had the grey at his temples that had started 2 years ago, and that I had told him looked distinguished, and that he had pretended to be annoyed by, but had secretly appreciated. He was wearing a jacket I had given him for his birthday last year. He was Thomas, my husband. The man whose funeral I had attended 3 weeks ago. He was alive. He was carrying my sister's bag. I want to describe what happened in my body in that moment, because I think it matters, and because the honest version of this story requires it. It was not the dramatic thunderclap of movie revelations. It was quieter than that, and worse. It was the specific feeling of the ground shifting without moving, of standing completely still while everything that was built on what you believed rearranged itself without your permission. I took a step toward him. He looked up. He saw me. I watched his face do something I had never seen it do before, in 6 years of looking at that face across tables, and in arguments, and in the ordinary mornings that make up the bulk of a life. Something collapsed in it, then composed itself. The collapse and the composure happened in less than 2 seconds. He took a step toward me. He looked past Lauren. He looked past the hotel behind him. He looked at me with the eyes of a man who has been running and has turned around and found that the thing he was running from has been standing still, waiting, this whole time. He said my name. He said Kate. He said, "You weren't supposed to find out." I said nothing. He stepped closer. He lowered his voice. He said, "I can explain. Please. Not here. I can explain everything, but not here." Lauren had gone very still. She was standing 8 feet away, and she was not moving, and she was not speaking, and she was looking at the ground between us with the expression of someone who has been holding something for too long and has just been relieved of it against their will. I looked at her. She looked up. She said, "Kate." I said, "Get away from me." She said, "I know how this." I said, "Get away from me right now." She took a step back. I looked at Thomas. I looked at him for a long time. At the jacket I had given him. At the bag he was carrying that belonged to my sister. At the grey in his temples, and the forward lean of his posture, and the face I had looked at every morning for 6 years before I looked at anything else. I said, "I buried you." He said, "Kate, listen." I said, "I buried you." There were 60 people. Janet flew from Portland. He said nothing. I said, "I kept your shoes by the back door." He said, "I'm sorry." 2 words. Inadequate to the point of being almost funny, if anything about this was funny, which it was not. "I am sorry," said the man who had attended his own funeral by proxy, while his wife and his mother stood beside a casket. I turned around. I walked back to my car. I sat in the driver's seat, and I did not start the engine for a long time. Thomas came out of the hotel after about 3 minutes. He stood by my car door. He knocked on the window. I did not open it. He said something through the glass that I did not hear because I was looking at the parking sticker on Lauren's rear tail light and thinking about the specific way lies work, which is that they do not announce themselves. They accumulate. They live inside ordinary things. A phone call taken in a bathroom, a parking sticker on a tail light, 60 people at a funeral in the rain, until the ordinary things are no longer ordinary and you are sitting in a parking lot looking at your dead husband through a car window. He knocked again. I started the engine. I drove home. The call came at 9 that evening, Lauren's number. I looked at it ringing on the counter for a long time. Then I picked it up. She said, "I need to explain." I said, "Yes." She said, "I know what you think you saw." I said, "Lauren, I know what I saw." She was quiet. I said, "I need you to tell me everything. Not the version you've been working on for the last 6 hours. Everything. She told me. I am going to tell you what she said, not because I want to protect her, or because I think her version is the whole truth, but because the truth of what she said is the only way to understand what comes after. Thomas had come to her 2 months before the accident. He had told her he was in trouble. Not small trouble, the kind of trouble that has a number attached to it, a specific, documented number that he had been managing and mismanaging and hiding for 3 years without my knowledge. Business debt from a venture that had gone sideways. Personal debt from the strategy he had used to try to fix the business debt. The kind of debt that arrives at your door in the form of people rather than envelopes. He told Lauren he needed to disappear. Not permanently, he said. Temporarily, long enough to reorganize, to make arrangements, to find a way through that did not involve me knowing everything he had hidden. He told her I would be fine, that the life insurance would take care of the immediate things, that I was practical and capable and would land on my feet. He told her it would be 3 months, maybe 4. He would come back. He would explain. He would fix it. He told her all of this, and then he asked her to help him. And Lauren, my sister, who had handed me tissues through every version of my crying and who had been my person for 34 years, said yes. She said yes because Thomas told her that the alternative for him was something she did not want to name over the phone, something involving the people with the numbers and the doors, and she believed him. I think she believed him. I also think she wanted to believe him because believing him was easier than the alternative, which was coming to me and saying, "Your husband has been lying to you for 3 years, and he wants to disappear and leave you to manage the aftermath." That was the conversation she did not have with me. She helped him stage it instead. I said, "Whose body was in the casket?" She said, "There wasn't one." I said, "What?" She said, "The casket was closed." I sat with that. Closed casket. Lauren had recommended it. She had said it was cleaner. She had said that the accident had been, she had used the word significant. I said, "You told me identification had been made." She said, "Thomas arranged it." The accident was real. There was a real crash on the interstate that morning. He had contacts. He knew someone in a position to... She stopped. She said the details were not something she fully understood. I said, "You helped him fake his death, and you attended his funeral." She said yes. I said, "And you held my hand." She did not answer. I said, "Lauren, you held my hand." She said, "I know." I said, "Get off my phone." I called a lawyer the next morning. His name was Andrew Cole. He was recommended by a woman I worked with, whose divorce had been complicated in specific ways that required a specific kind of lawyer, and complicated had seemed like the right word for my situation. I told him everything in order, without elaboration, the way you tell things to a lawyer when you have learned from watching people tell things to lawyers that elaboration is expensive and concision is a form of respect for both of your time. He listened all the way through, without interrupting. Then he said, "How much do you know about his financial situation?" I said, "I know what he told me. I'm now aware that is not the same as what is true." He said, "Okay." He said it the way lawyers say okay when they mean there is a great deal of work ahead of us. He flipped to a new page of his legal pad. "Let's start with what you do know." What I knew was this. Thomas had a life insurance policy through his employer that named me as beneficiary. The claim had been initiated. It had not been paid. A 3-week investigation period was standard. What Andrew knew, or discovered over the following days, was this. There was a second policy. Thomas had taken it out 18 months earlier without my knowledge. The beneficiary was not me. The beneficiary was Lauren. I want to tell you what I did not do when I found this out, because the impulse is to describe the dramatic version, the throwing of things, the calls made in rage, the confrontation that produces the satisfying outcome. What I did was go very still. The same stillness that had come over me in the parking lot, the ground shifting without moving. Lauren, who had sat with me at the funeral, who had held my hand, who was the beneficiary of a life insurance policy that had been taken out by my husband in the months before he faked his own death. $200,000, paid to my sister if the plan had worked. If I had never taken the long way home, I did not call Lauren about the insurance policy. I did not call Thomas. I did not call anyone except Andrew, and I told Andrew what I intended to do, and Andrew said, "That is your right," and then added, "For the record, what you are describing is also a federal crime, which I think is worth saying before you decide what you want to do with it." I said, "I know." I sat with that for 3 days. On the 4th day, I called a detective named Walsh, who worked in the financial crimes unit of the county police department. I had gotten his name from Andrew, who had given it to me. In the way lawyers give you names they are not quite advising you to use. I told Detective Walsh the same story I had told Andrew. He also did not interrupt. At the end, he said, "And you can confirm your husband is alive." I said, "I can confirm I spoke to him in a hotel parking lot." He said, "Do you have any contact information for him?" I said no. Then I said, "But I know who does." What happened next happened over weeks, not in one afternoon, and I am going to tell it to you the way it actually happened, which is not cinematically. There was no dramatic arrest in a parking lot. There was paperwork. There were phone calls I was not part of. There were things Andrew could tell me and things he could not, and things that were still being assembled from pieces I did not have access to. Thomas was located in mid-November. I was not there when it happened. I was in my kitchen making tea and watching the light change on the backyard, which is the kind of ordinary thing you are doing when the extraordinary things are happening somewhere else. Detective Walsh called me at 4 in the afternoon. He said, "We have him." I said, "Okay." He said, "There will be a process. It will take time." I said, "I understand." He said, "Are you doing all right?" I looked at the tea in my hand. I said, "I'm working on it." He said, "That's a good answer." Lauren was also part of the investigation. The policy, the one in her name, was evidence of knowledge, of planning, of participation. She had not staged the accident herself. She had not, as far as anyone could establish, known every detail of Thomas's financial situation. But she had helped him disappear, and she had known about the policy, and she had stood beside me at a funeral for a man she knew was not in that casket. Those things do not disappear because someone did not know the full plan. She called me once, in November. The lawyer for her own situation had presumably told her not to, but Lauren has never been good at being told not to do things, which I know because I have known her for 34 years, and it is one of the things I have always loved about her. She said, "I need you to know I was trying to protect him." I said, "I know." She said, "I know that doesn't help." I said, "It doesn't. Not yet." She said, "I thought he was going to hurt himself if he didn't get out. I believed that." I held the phone. I thought about Thomas telling her that. Using that particular fear, the one that makes a person set aside everything else, that makes protecting someone from their worst impulse feel more urgent than protecting anyone else from anything, including the truth. I said, "That might be true. I don't know what he told you and what he made up." She said, "I don't either, anymore." We stayed on the phone for a moment without speaking. I said, "Lauren." She said, "Yeah." I said, "I'm not done being angry." She said, "I know." I said, "But I need you to know that I know you loved me. Even when you did this, I know you loved me." She started crying. The kind that comes after you have been not crying for a very long time and have run out of the ability to not. I said, "That's enough for now." I hung up. Thomas was charged in December. I will not list the charges because the legal language of them is not the point, and because Andrew explained it to me in more detail than I needed, and the relevant part is simply this. What he did had a name, and the name had consequences, and the consequences were not mine to manage. That was perhaps the most useful thing Andrew said to me across the months of our professional relationship. The consequences are not yours to manage. You did not create this situation. You do not owe anyone your energy in cleaning it up. I had been cleaning up Thomas's situations for 6 years without knowing what I was cleaning up. I was finished. I went back to work in November. My colleagues were careful around me in the specific way people are careful around someone who has lost someone, which is a care I received for approximately 3 weeks before I asked my manager to treat me normally, by which I meant to give me actual work and stop looking at me like I might cry on the spreadsheets. She gave me actual work. I did not cry on the spreadsheets. The insurance claim was suspended pending investigation. Some of it would eventually come back to me. Not all of it. The debt Thomas had been managing, I use the word managing loosely, because what he had actually been doing was rearranging it into new shapes rather than addressing it. That debt had my name on some of it. Andrew helped me understand which parts were mine by obligation and which were not, and then helped me begin to address the ones that were. This is the part of the story nobody tells. Not the hotel parking lot, not the detective's phone call, not the confrontation that I am going to tell you about shortly. The part where you sit in a financial advisor's office for 3 hours on a Thursday and go through documents that reveal, slowly and completely, that the life you have been living had an entire architecture underneath it that you did not know was there. Thomas had been building a second life for at least 2 years. Not a dramatic one, a practical one, small accounts under different arrangements. Money moved through a business structure I had not known existed. The kind of construction that happens gradually, when someone is planning an exit but has not yet told the person they are exiting from. Me. He was exiting from me. The first time I understood that fully, not as an idea but as a fact, a documented, time-stamped fact. I sat in Andrew's office and I was quiet for a long time. And Andrew, who is a good lawyer, and therefore also understands something about human nature, did not say anything. He let me sit with it. I thought about the shoes by the back door. I had put them back twice. I thought about what it means to love someone who has been half gone for 2 years without your knowledge, about the specific grief of losing a person you were already losing without knowing you were losing them, about all the ordinary mornings, the granola bars, the parking sticker, the unfolded laundry, the particular way he always forgot to replace the coffee filters. That had been happening alongside something I had not been shown. I thought about Thomas at the hotel, carrying Lauren's bag. I thought about Lauren at the funeral holding my hand. I thought about a woman who had been his wife for 6 years and had been the last to know. I thought about all of it, in Andrew's office, for quite a long time. Then I said, okay. What's next? There was a meeting. Andrew did not arrange it, and Detective Walsh did not arrange it, and it was not formal in any legal sense. It happened because Thomas asked his own lawyer to request it, and his lawyer called Andrew, and Andrew asked me whether I wanted to do it. I said yes. I drove to Andrew's office on a Wednesday morning in January. The sky was doing the flat grey thing it does in January, when it has run out of ideas. I wore the coat I had worn to Thomas's funeral, not for any reason except that it was cold, and it was the warmest coat I owned. I thought about that afterward. I drove to meet my living husband wearing the coat I had worn to his funeral. Sometimes the details are so absurd that you stop being able to take them seriously, which is its own kind of mercy. Thomas was already there when I arrived. He was sitting in one of Andrew's chairs in a grey sweater I did not recognize, which meant he had bought it in the months since he disappeared, which meant he had been living a life in which grey sweaters were purchased, and there was no particular reason to note them. He stood up when I came in. I sat down. He sat back down. Andrew left us to it. We looked at each other. 6 years of looking at that face, and it still felt like looking at something I had not fully learned. Maybe that is how it always is with people. Maybe you are always still learning the person, and then they go, for any reason, in any way, and the learning stops, mid-lesson. He said, I don't know where to start. I said, start with the debt. He told me about the debt. I am not going to give you every detail, because some of it is still being resolved in ways that have legal dimensions, and because the specific numbers matter less than the shape of the thing, which is this. He had made a decision 3 years ago to try to fix something himself rather than bring it to me, and that decision had compounded into a situation he had decided was unmanageable. And when he decided it was unmanageable, he decided the most manageable thing he could do was leave. I said, you could have told me. He said, I know. I said, 3 years ago, at the beginning, when you could have just told me. He said, I know. I said, I would have been angry. He said, I know. I said, Thomas, I would have been angry, and we would have dealt with it. That's what you do when you are married to someone. He was quiet. I said, you decided what I could handle without asking me. He said, yes. I said, and you decided I would be fine, that the insurance would cover it, that I was practical. He said, I believed that. I said, I was fine. You're right. That's not the point. The point is that you decided you knew what I was, and what I needed, and what I could manage, and then you arranged the world around that decision without consulting me. He looked at the table. I said, and you used Lauren. He said, I am sorry about that. Genuinely. More than anything else. I said, she was the one thing I had that was mine, and you used her. He said, yes. I said, and she let you. He said nothing. We sat in the silence that follows an honest accounting of a thing. The silence that is not comfortable but is real, which is better than comfort that is false. He said, Kate, I loved you. I said, I know you did. That is not enough. He said, no. He looked at me. It isn't. I said, I need you to know one thing. He waited. I said, I am not angry at the love, whatever it was, however complicated it was, however mixed up with all the rest of it. The love was real to me. I am not going to pretend I invented it, or that the 6 years were nothing, because the ending was a disaster. I loved you. We loved each other. That is true. He said yes. I said, and it is not enough, and you are going to have to live inside that, which is the most honest thing I can tell you. He nodded. His jaw was tight in the way of someone who is holding a very large thing and knows there is no way to put it down gently. I stood up. He said, what happens now? I said, now I go home, and then whatever needs to happen legally happens, and I deal with it, and you deal with yours. He said, I'm sorry, Kate. I said, I believe you. I picked up my coat. I said, I really did love the grey at your temples. I just want you to know that. He did not know what to do with that. I did not need him to. I left. The divorce took 6 months. I will not walk you through every week of it, because the weeks are not the point. The point is that at the end of them, I was no longer Thomas's wife, which meant I was no longer Thomas's wife in life, or in death, or in any intermediate state between the two. I sold the house, not because I had to, because I did not want to live in a house that had been built on a foundation I had not been told about. I bought a smaller one, on a street with large trees, and a neighbor who grows things in her front yard and brings them over without being asked. The first week I was there, she brought me tomatoes. I thanked her. She said, there are more where those came from, and left. I kept 2 things from my marriage. A photograph from a trip we had taken in the 3rd year, before the debt, before the decision, when whatever was between us was still only what it appeared to be. I kept it because it was true when it was taken, and the truth of a moment does not evaporate because of what came after. The second thing I kept was a habit. Thomas used to make coffee on Saturday mornings before I was awake. He was not a morning person. This was an effort for him, a deliberate thing. He would have the coffee ready when I came downstairs, and he would not make a production of it. He would just hand me the cup. On Saturday mornings, I make my own coffee now. I make it early, before I need it, and I let it sit for a few minutes before I drink it. It is not the same. It is something. Lauren and I are still in the process of being sisters. I want to be honest about that, because honesty is the only thing this story has to offer. We are not fine. We are not rebuilt. We are in the long, imperfect, necessary work of two people who have hurt each other in specific and documented ways and have decided that the history is long enough to be worth working toward. She calls on Sundays. I usually answer. We talk about ordinary things. Sometimes we talk about what happened, and when we do, we talk about it directly, which is hard and necessary, and the only version that will eventually produce anything real. She said to me once, "I thought I was protecting him." I said, "I know." She said, "I should have protected you." I said, "Yes, you should have." She said, "I know." That was the conversation. It was enough for that day. The next Sunday there was a different conversation. That is how it works. You have the conversation you can have that day, and you come back next week and have another one. I am still learning that this is what love actually is. Not the grand gesture or the dramatic sacrifice. The coming back. The Sunday phone call. The next conversation. It is less than I thought love was supposed to look like. It is more than I knew how to ask for. Here is what I want to give you before I go. All of it. The first thing. The people who hold your hand can be the same people who know the thing you haven't been told. These are not mutually exclusive. Love and betrayal can live inside the same person simultaneously, and understanding that does not make the betrayal smaller. It makes the person more human. And humans are capable of things that require holding two true things at the same time. The second thing. The debt that someone keeps from you is not your fault to carry. Not the financial kind, and not the emotional kind. Thomas decided he knew what I could handle and built a structure around that decision without consulting me. That structure collapsed into my life. I did not build it. I did not owe anyone the energy of cleaning it up without being compensated for the cleaning. The third thing. The long way home is sometimes the most important way home. I took the long way because I was not ready to go back to the house. I saw her car in the parking lot because I took the long way. Grief had made me take the long way. What I found on the long way changed everything. Pay attention to the detours. They are sometimes where the truth lives. The fourth thing. The shoes by the back door. Thomas's shoes. I moved them and put them back twice, because moving them felt like agreeing to something I was not finished disagreeing with. I think about this often. About the things we hold on to, not because we cannot let go, but because the letting go means accepting a truth the mind is still in the process of absorbing. Give yourself the time. The letting go comes when it comes, and not before. There is no shortcut. And the fifth thing, I drove to meet my living husband in the coat I wore to his funeral, and I found out it was the right coat, and the wrong funeral, and the whole story was not the story I had been told. And at the end of a long day in a lawyer's office, I got back in my car and I drove home. I made it home. That is still the thing I am most proud of. Not the detective's phone call, not the confrontation, not what I said when I left the meeting. That I drove home, that I kept going, that I made coffee on Saturday mornings and looked at the large trees on my new street and answered the phone on Sundays and came back for the next conversation. I kept going. If you are in the middle of something that has asked you to keep going, if you are sitting somewhere tonight holding something heavy that does not have a clean ending yet, I want you to know that keeping going is enough. It is more than enough. It is the whole thing. The house is smaller. The trees are larger. The tomatoes were excellent. I'm Kate. The shoes have been moved. Subscribe. Leave a comment. Tell me about the long way home that showed you something you needed to see. I'll see you next time.